Not all great men in the Bible began with honor. Some came into the world under the weight of contempt, marked before they even took their first step. Jephthah was one of them. His story doesn't begin with glory, but with shame. Born in Gilead, his name already carried a whisper of scandal, the son of a prostitute. It wasn't a secret, but no one liked to speak of it aloud. He grew up seeing faces turn away, hearing doors close. Even his own brothers, legitimate sons of the household, made it clear from the start. He was an intruder, a mistake that needed to be fixed. Over time, the looks turned into words. The words became insults, until, driven by pride and hard hearts, his brothers cast him out. "You have no part among us," they shouted. And so Jephthah was thrown out like something impure. No land, no inheritance, no comfort. It was in Tob, a distant and forgotten land, that Jephthah found refuge. There, among rejected men, thieves, and exiles, he was no longer a bastard. He was simply another among the wounded. But amid the despised, something about him stood out. Maybe it was the firmness in his gaze. Maybe it was the way he endured pain without resentment. The fact is, others began to follow him, not out of force, but out of respect. Jephthah didn't ask to lead. He became a leader because his pain inspired, his courage united. In a short time, the one who had been rejected by all began to command a loyal group, made up of men who, like him, knew what it was to be cast aside. His reputation grew like fire in dry straw, and in Gilead, where they had once ignored him, they now spoke his name with urgency, because a new threat loomed over Israel. The Ammonites advanced like a plague over the cities. Panic, death, despair. The elders gathered in appeals, seeking someone who could face the terror. But it wasn't just strength they needed. It was leadership. It was respect. And then, among worried faces and embarrassed silences, someone finally said the name everyone had been avoiding: Jephthah. Jephthah. He was far away, living among forgotten men in Tob, but his fame spread faster than messengers. Stories about his courage, his steady leadership, and the way he united the outcasts spread like whispers across borders. In Gilead, the elders listened to these stories with a bitter taste, because it was him, it was exactly him that they now needed. The very one they had rejected. The irony burned, but necessity spoke louder. They sent men to Tob, not guided by honor, but by urgency. The road was long, uncertain, just like the mission. When they arrived, they found Jephthah surrounded by his men, rough men, but loyal, alert like war dogs. And in the center there he was, standing tall, firm, with the look of one who carries scars and authority. When they heard the request from Gilead's emissaries, a heavy silence fell. Jephthah watched them with eyes that knew too much. Those faces, though aged, he recognized. They were the same ones who had cast him out. The air seemed suspended, filled with memories and wounds. He walked toward them slowly, as if each step were an unanswered question. And then he broke the silence. "Didn't you all hate me?" Jephthah said, his voice firm and clear, like a blade cutting slowly. "Didn't you cast me out of my father's house as if I were a shame?" His eyes pierced through the men. "And now, when danger is at your doorstep, you come back asking for my help." The elders' silence was like a confession, no words in defense, just heads lowered, eyes to the ground. Jephthah let them sink into the weight of the moment for a moment before continuing. "Now, you want me to be your leader, your savior." There was a tone of steel in his voice, mixed with the pain of a past still alive. With no other choice, the elders swallowed their pride. They admitted their mistake, and with humility they asked Jephthah to return, offering him something they had never imagined: the command of all the people. Not just a general, a leader, a chief over Gilead. It was more than forgiveness, it was power. But Jephthah, now mature, was no longer the young man seeking acceptance. He wanted certainty, he wanted a word, If he were to return, it would be as a chief, yes, but also as a judge over the people, with authority, with honor, and they agreed, swearing before the Lord that they would keep their promise. Even so, Jephthah knew it wasn't enough to be named. The real battle was still to come. The Ammonites were cruel, ruthless, and Gilead was land cracked by weakness. Jephthah returned, but not as the prodigal son. There was no celebration, just suspicious glances. Some feared him, others hated him in silence. He walked among them without turning his gaze. He was no longer the rejected bastard. He was a man forged in the desert. The elders introduced him to the people. It was official. Jephthah was now the commander of Gilead, the man who would lead them against the Ammonites, and he accepted. But before the sword, he would use the word. He sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites seeking peace, not out of weakness, but wisdom. The message was firm. The land you seek was not taken from you, but from the Amorites. It was God who gave it to his people. You now claim what never belonged to you. Argument after argument, Jephthah built a solid defense, using history itself as a shield. It was diplomacy in its purest form, firm, just, direct. But the king of the Ammonites didn't want logic. He wanted dominion. His silence was deafening. The response was clear. He had chosen war. Jephthah received the news calmly, but within himself the decision had already been made. If there would be no peace, there would be combat. And before marching to the field, before facing the battle that would define the fate of Gilead, Jephthah did something that would change the course of history forever. On the eve of war, he withdrew in silence. The weight of the calling on his shoulders was greater than any sword he had ever held. It was not just a war for territory. It was the soul of Gilead, the future of Israel. Jephthah felt the people watching him, some with faith, others with distrust. But there was one voice louder than all, his own conscience. He wondered, in the silence of the eve, if he was worthy of the mission, if he was truly the chosen one, or just a pawn in a destiny that mocked the rejected. It was then, overcome by a sacred desperation, that Jephthah knelt. The ground was cold, the night dense. His clenched hands trembled as if holding something invisible, perhaps fear, perhaps faith. In a hoarse whisper, he made a vow to the Lord. If you deliver the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out first from the door of my house to meet me, I will offer as a sacrifice to you. His words were not empty. They came from the soul, a promise born of urgency and total surrender, a vow of devotion, but also of ignorance of the cost. And with that, he rose with new strength as one who leaves his fate in the hands of God. The sun rose over the fields when Jephthah called his men. The same ones who once had been treated like scum now marched as an army, shoulder to shoulder with their commander, men of Tob, men of pain and redemption. The Ammonites awaited them on the other side, armed, confident, sure they would win another battle. But Jephthah did not come with arrogance. He came with the weight of a sacred vow and the faith of one who had given everything. The ground trembled with the steps of the warriors, but in Jephthah's heart, what echoed was something else: the name of God. He knew the battle would be fierce, but he did not know that the true fight was still to come. The battle exploded like thunder, swords, spears, screams. The field turned to dust and blood. But Jephthah fought like a man possessed by something greater. Every command he gave was precise. His eyes saw beyond. The Ammonites, once confident, were crushed. It was as if the very heavens fought alongside Israel. The victory was total. The enemy fled, defeated, and the people of Gilead, once bowed by fear, now rose with pride. Jephthah had done the impossible. He had freed his land. He was more than a leader. He was a symbol. the news spread fast. Shouts of joy filled Gilead, and Jephthah's name echoed like a song in the homes. But while everyone celebrated, he walked in silence. He didn't smile. He didn't raise his arms, because his mind wasn't on the battlefield. It was on his house. The vow still pulsed like a wound. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew what he had promised. And a vow before the Lord cannot be broken. The return was slow, solemn. His men sang, clapped, and praised the victory. But Jephthah followed in silence, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the hills of his childhood now seemed like shadows. And then, in the distance, he saw his house, and he saw the door open. A figure ran toward him. It wasn't a servant, it wasn't an animal, it was her, his daughter, his only daughter. She danced among the stones, with her arms raised and a smile that carried the sun. Her joy was pure, innocent. She celebrated her father, the hero. But for Jephthah, everything stopped. The world crumbled in that instant. The victory shouts went silent. The ground seemed to collapse beneath his feet. The vow, the promise, the daughter. Jephthah's soul was torn apart without a single sword. He screamed, not a cry of war, but of pain. He tore his clothes, his face twisted as one who faces their own sentence. He knew there was no turning back. His heart was divided between the purest love and the harshest loyalty. The battle he had fought in the fields was small compared to the one now raging inside him. Jephthah's heart broke right there at the moment he saw his daughter running toward him. She danced as one celebrating life itself, light, radiant, with her arms open and her face full of pure joy. For her, it was the return of the father hero. For Jephthah, it was the inevitable fulfillment of a vow that should never have been made. With every step she took, his chest sank deeper. When he embraced her, he didn't feel the relief of victory, but the weight of a sentence. And then he fell to his knees, defeated, not by enemies, but by the promise that bound him to the heavens. "My daughter," he murmured, his voice choked, tears burning his eyes. "You brought me joy, but also the deepest affliction. I made a vow to the Lord, and I cannot go back." The young girl, still not fully understanding, looked at him with innocent, confused eyes. But when she heard the truth, she did not scream, nor run, nor beg. Her expression changed, but what appeared wasn't fear. It was understanding, as if within her the same sense of honor that guided her father also pulsed. "If you made a vow to the Lord," she said serenely, "then fulfill it. But give me just 2 months to go to the mountains with my companions, and there mourn the life I will not have." Edezer, there was so much purity in her words, so much silent surrender that Jephthah could barely respond. He simply nodded, his eyes welling up, knowing that time would be a slow farewell. She went to the mountains with her friends, and there for 2 months she wept. Not only for the youth she would never live, but for the father who, because of a vow, had been wounded within. Each day was an echo of renunciation. Each sunset, a wordless goodbye. And when the time ended, she returned. Without hesitation, without faltering, she was ready. Jephthah fulfilled the vow he had made to the Lord, and with that, silence fell over Gilead like an endless mourning. Pain spread like wind through the homes. The victory over the Ammonites was real, but no one celebrated as before. The people whispered his name with respect and sorrow. The promise had been kept. But Jephthah did not know peace. And as if the open wound wasn't enough, another conflict arose. The tribe of Ephraim, wounded in pride, crossed the Jordan with anger. They came in force, armed, demanding explanations. "Why didn't you call us to fight against the Ammonites?" they shouted. "We'll burn your house down with you in it." The affront was absurd. Where were they when Jephthah was cast out, when no one dared face the enemy? Jephthah listened to them in silence, and then he responded with a firm voice and without looking away. When the people were in danger, I called for help, and no one came. I fought because there was no one else, and the Lord gave me the victory. And now, you come demanding what you didn't help to conquer? But Ephraim would not accept arguments. The words quickly turned into war, and the blood of brothers was shed on the promised ground. The victory was again Jephthah's, but each conquest brought more pain than glory. It was as if God allowed the victories, but did not ease the burden. His days as judge were marked by 6 years of silent leadership. There were no grand feasts, no exaggerated celebrations, just the weight of history. He was respected, but the gaze of the people carried more compassion than honor. His house, now empty, echoed with the laughter he would never hear again. Jephthah did not seek recognition. He did not lead out of vanity. He was driven by duty. A judge shaped by rejection, pain, and faith, and perhaps that is why God chose him. His life was a paradox, at once an example of courage and a solemn warning about the weight of promises. And so the years passed, without banners, without crowds, but with deep scars. His story, however, did not fade with him. It remained alive, told from father to son, remembered in the camps, recited in the assemblies. Because Jephthah was not just a warrior, he was a living lesson. He teaches us that rejection does not define the end, that God can raise unlikely leaders from the ashes of humiliation, that the pains of the past can forge the character needed to triumph in the present. But he also warns us, a vow made in the heat of desperation can cost more than we imagine. And in the end, Jephthah reminds us that faith is not free from suffering, that obedience sometimes requires renunciations that wound the soul. His life is a mirror of paradoxes, triumph and loss, honor and pain, leadership and silence. But it is precisely this complexity that makes him eternal in the memory of the people. If you've made it this far, it's because you feel the weight of these stories as much as we do. Like the video, share it with someone who loves to discover the truth behind the scriptures and subscribe to the channel. There's still much to explore in the shadows and glories of the Bible's pages. Let's explore these powerful revelations together.